Attribution gets much harder when you're doing ABM. There needs to be a fundamental alignment and understanding at the business level where now that you're doing ABM, it's less about fighting for credit and it's more about fighting to close the deal. Usually when your ABM campaigns aren't working, it's because there's a fundamental lack of strategy alignment, So that needs to be in place and sales needs to be on the same page. Over personalization can be a problem with ABM. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 6 of Performance Therapy. In today's episode, Gonzalo and I are talking about the Frankenstein funnel, why your ABM campaigns are not converting. So for all of you watching that are doing account-based marketing ABM, this one is for you. Gonzalo, we were reviewing our talking points just before recording, and we were like, this is going to be a monster episode because there's so many things to touch on here. And I think maybe let's just start at the highest of levels, and then we'll kind of dive in from there. So what is ABM and account-based marketing for those that may or may not know?
Yeah, so account-based marketing is pretty much when you go align with sales or not, you have a list of target accounts that collectively, and this is ideally, you want to go after. So both marketing and sales prioritize and say, okay, we have a list of 100 accounts that we really want to do business with. And then you pretty much map out the whole funnel to go after this list of target accounts, whether you penetrate with those accounts, sales, in this case, if those are aligned with marketing, they also going after those accounts with cold outreach. And yeah, that's in a simplified way, that's pretty much ABM for you.
Yeah.
Whether you're combining your marketing tactics with sales tactics with the sole purpose of penetrating with those accounts and getting those accounts in contact with sales. Then, of course, letting sales do their magic and closing the deals.
Yeah, the way I would frame it too is ABM is sales and marketing alignment working together to achieve an objective, which is getting deals closed from a set list of companies, right? Fundamentally. So ABM is not marketing, targeting a list of 10,000 accounts in isolation. That's just targeted awareness, and that's great. You should do it. Vice versa, sales, prospecting and reaching out to these decision makers in isolation is not ABM. It's just outbound, right? But when you combine the marketing and the sales component, they start to work together and they're all on the same page around, hey, here are the companies we care about. Now this is when you get into account-based marketing, which is a really exciting topic and something that works extremely well for B2B, especially if you're going up market, mid-market plus enterprise. You're going to be doing some level of an ABM play at that,
Yeah, a lot of companies are trending more in that direction, right? They're realizing that it's not just about on LinkedIn, we want to go after companies greater than 500 employees working at these specific industries, these specific titles. They now are understanding that works to an extent, but they're now taking their programs to the next level. And there's a lot of talks, ABM, ABX,
all the acronyms.
Yeah.
Whether you call it
top of mind for sure.
Whether it's ABM, account-based marketing, ABX, account-based orchestration, or account-based experience, there's like all these words. Fundamentally, it's you and sales are on the same page, and we've got a game plan of like how we're going to try to get it to these accounts, which leads us to one very important point of like why your ABM campaigns may or may not be working. And the first most important point is attribution. Attribution gets much harder when you're doing ABM. And fundamentally, if you decide, hey, I want to do ABM and this matters to us, there needs to be a fundamental alignment and understanding at the business level where now that you're doing ABM, it's less about fighting for credit and it's more about fighting to close the deal. Meaning if the lead came from LinkedIn or Google or it came from an outbound message from a BDR, like no one cares. Outside, not that no one cares. They don't care enough to the point where it says LinkedIn is a failure, you know what I mean? Or Google is a failure, or Meta is a failure. It's like, no, they just happen to have converted from this touch point. But it's the collective sum of all of the parts working together that should hopefully have led to that person responding to the outbound email, right? Because they also saw the ads on LinkedIn, which pre-framed them, warmed them up.
Yeah,
vice versa.
I saw this post somewhere on LinkedIn that they made this experiment where they started going after the same list of accounts as sales, like ABM, and sales started noticing a lift on open rates on their cold outreach, which is not something you usually measure as a leading KPI.
That's really cool.
But I thought it was pretty interesting, and I kind of want to test it ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Because we're always talking about, especially us with this mindset, we're always talking about these, marketing and sales need to be aligned, but the open rates on the cold outreach emails, that's not something you usually tie back to the effectiveness of the marketing program or the paid media in this case.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying it's 100% due to paid media, don't get me wrong, but
There's an impact.
that post, that analysis that they did was the before and after, starting going after those accounts with paid media.
Yeah.
So it was like pretty, like before there wasn't anything and after there was. So there's some kind of lift for sure. On top of all the other metrics.
Yeah.
So it was pretty interesting.
That is really cool. And this goes back to like one of our earlier discussions in an earlier episode of the importance of those leading KPIs. So let's talk about, why your ABM campaigns are working. Obviously, we have to talk about strategy.
Yeah.
Fundamental, and the way we think about strategy is we use the 5 stages model. So if you want to learn more about this, building a paid media program course, we talk about it. But basically it's create, capture, accelerate, revive, and expand. Each one of these stages are potential areas where you could stand up campaigns to try to drive a meaningful impact. So for context, the create stage is all around building brand affinity and trust. We call it create, and the focus of this stage is building brand affinity and trust. It's a level deeper than just saying tofu, impressions served, and then you call it a day. Like, how do you really build trust? That's the goal. The second stage is capture, which is all about how we convert interest from in-market buyers. The next stage is accelerate. Now that we've got the deal open, how do we continue to nurture them so that we can move them to close one faster and support sales? Then you have revive, which, hey, not everyone is going to actually go through the process successfully. How do we bring back those deals? And then finally is expand. We have customers. How do we drive more revenue from those existing customers? So using the 5 stages model, this is the framework that we use to now map out our entire full funnel paid media strategy. And in this case, because we're talking about account-based marketing, what we're doing is we're thinking, okay, how can we take this list of accounts, however many they are, hopefully it's not too crazy, as we've talked about, which we're going to talk about in a second around account prioritization, but a meaningful list of accounts. And then how do we create an experience across create, capture, accelerate, revive, and expand to move these users through that buyer's journey to the best of our ability, working in tandem with sales. So that, when I think about like, what does a great ABM program look like? It's that. A lot of folks listening to this, maybe you don't have a framework, right, to help conceptualize what good looks like. And you might be using a framework like tofu, mofu, bofu. It's better than nothing, but the only gripe that I have with tofu, mofu, bofu is it's designed for B2C and small business, right? Where the first point of conversion also warrants the sale, right? Like if they convert, and it's game over. But with B2B, especially if you're going up market, like 6, 12 month, 24 month sales cycles, just once the deal is open, like there's so many steps that have to take place in order for them to actually convert. So you want to make sure that you're actually optimizing your driving campaigns post-conversion as well. And then, of course, depending on your goals, if you're focusing more on net new acquisition, you might focus more on create and capture, then accelerate and revive, etc. But you know what you're trying to accomplish. You can set up the necessary campaigns for each stage and then define your leading KPIs, your budget, right? And now you can just go to market and you can optimize those different stages accordingly.
Yeah. And that's where most brands go wrong because they don't think of it from that perspective.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a good segue to, I don't know if there's a specific topic you have in mind in terms of where we should start, because like you said, there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
And I know we have limited time.
Yeah, we got strategy, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of give everyone context, container, right? This is the canvas that we'll be using to create this strategy, right? And usually when your ABM campaigns aren't working, it's because there's a fundamental lack of strategy alignment, So that needs to be in place, and sales needs to be on the same page. So for example, like if we're doing create campaigns, you're doing these top of funnel campaigns, and you're going to be promoting a webinar, which we love. Sales should also see what the ads look like for that webinar, right? They should be informed on what the webinar is about, et cetera, right? So they're also on the same page. And then they should also be informed of, okay, for these webinar leads, should we not follow up with them? How should we follow up with them, right? because you can't follow up with these leads the same as you would somebody who booked a demo. It's a completely different mentality, right?
Yeah.
So let's start off first with account prioritization. Let's really define for everyone watching here, like how to think about prioritizing our accounts. And then we'll dive into the weeds around like personas, account list builds, and kind of unfold that a bit more. So when you think of account prioritization, what are the traps people fall under with that?
First of all, they have no prioritization.
Yeah.
That's an easy one. And then even when they do have prioritization and for the folks that watch some of the earlier episodes, a lot of that stuff kind of falls into these ABM system and this ABM play, right? And this topic. But like, even when they do have a prioritization, they also need to make sure that for the accounts that they want to do business with, it's not the wish list. It's like, yes, it's a wish list, but it needs to be a realistic wish list. And that's where most go wrong. They don't have, so when it comes to prioritization, they don't. That's simply put. And then when they do, they are too ambitious, which is good in some cases, but it's like, okay, can you actually serve those companies if they were to close with you? And are you actually expecting those companies to close, or it's just like a good logo that you can showcase internally? Like, oh guys, we got a lead from Google.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, everyone claps, but then at the end of the day, people will forget it. So the most common traps, it's like that. No prioritization at all. And then when they do prioritize, sometimes they prioritize it wrong in the way that they don't prioritize like the best fit companies, and maybe they use some kind of intent signals to make that prioritization, and we can get a bit into that.
That's a very important point. You outsource your prioritization to a tool.
Yeah.
That is very risky when you outsource your account prioritization to a tool. That tool is not perfect. There's always limitations to all the technology.
You have to review it too.
You have to review it. You have to actually see, especially when they're using tools like dynamic lists, like who is in these accounts, right? Like who are we actually targeting, and so on and so forth, and really scrutinizing it. Because again, like we talked about in the lead quality episode, you want to get to the point where the impression itself is valuable, right? Where you're getting in front of the right people. So just to give everyone some tactics here on account prioritization, I would say one thing you should absolutely do is focus on your accounts that are most likely to convert. So look at the win rates and identify, like, are there common patterns of, hey, these industries, et cetera, and sometimes it's very nuanced, like for context, if they're part of these industries and they have the LinkedIn Insight tag installed on their website, that's a better fit account for us. So you have to really the gold is in the details, really do that analysis of your win rates. Then from there, you want to prioritize based on fit and signal. So fit means who are they? So what industries do they fall under? Who are the individuals we need to speak to? You just generally speaking, the firmographics of the company, right? So industry, make, model, etc. It could also be the technographics like we talked about, LinkedIn Insight tag, Google Ads Pixel installed. Are they using a certain CMS? Do they use HubSpot as a CRM? All of this is like technographic information that you can take into consideration. You blend those two things together and you can have a really custom curated list of accounts. I think list building and the account list piece is the one. It is like, if you think about the dominoes, like, if I flick this domino, every domino falls after it. It is the first domino. And it cannot be shortcut. You can use AI as well, like ChatGPT, to help build these lists.
Curate,
help curate, etc. But you still have to have that manual review. So the second piece is signal. So when you're prioritizing your list of accounts, you want to consider not just the fit of who they are and what they, in terms of technology and their characteristics, but what have they done? And this is kind of more the intent side. So for example, like maybe for us, like I'll use AdConversion as a demonstration. We have a few industries that we do really, really well with. One of them is cybersecurity. So if we're running a campaign to a list of accounts for cybersecurity, obviously we're going to put together that list based on, companies that are in cybersecurity. They have certain company ranges, et cetera. We nail all that down. They have the LinkedIn Insight tag installed on their website, like these technographic components. Done. The second piece is going to be signal. So we wanted to take it a step further, not just any cybersecurity company. Maybe we have a list of like 1,000 companies, but now we're saying any of these cybersecurity companies where we have a former client working at it now. Maybe they turned over to a new company, like there's always employee turnover.
Yeah, low entry barrier.
Exactly. And now like that 1,000 dwindles down to like 100. And guess what? Because now we have also the signal, what the signal lets you do is it gives you a reason to contact them. And it also gives you a reason to make like your ads that much more personalized. The example that comes to my mind right now is Loom. So Loom, the video recording company, they basically identified where, and this is where you, not to get too off topic, but if you're using a product-led motion, like you can do cool things like this. But basically they realized if a certain amount of users are signed up at a company using Loom for free, their free plan, if they can get a certain concentration of those users where they get like an X number, they started to realize a correlation, the likelihood of kind of getting those free users to convert into like a paid team plan is far greater. So now when they're running their ABM efforts, they're trying to use their free trial to drive more free trial signups to increase the account density, right, of the amount of free users in that organization using Loom. So then now, guess what? In their ads, like which is what they were doing in the past, they were saying like, hey, 8 other team members of yours are using Loom. Why don't you join them, right? In the ads. So this is also like the data science component, right? Where you can start to use this data in your messaging to make it so much more powerful, right? Which this is, again, all falls under signals. And then if you're also aligning with your sales team, well, now when your sales team outreaches, guess what they're going to say?
Yeah, it's aligned.
8 other people like in your company, right? And even like better, imagine if you have their names, you can say John and Jeremy and Sarah and use Loom at your company, you know? And then imagine like they can also just reach out to those people and say, hey, are you enjoying Loom? Can you help us get more of your company involved, et cetera? We'll give you a referral link, you know? So when you have the
You
fit,
can get creative.
100%. And when you have the fit and you have the signal, then you can take it even to the next step and make it even more powerful. I actually learned this from Isaac Ware over at UserGems. He's the instructor for our ABM course. And he talks about this in the ABM course, like in much more detail, and it like blew my mind because I was just like, before I was just thinking in terms of fit and like really prioritizing those lists of accounts. But once I started to understand the signal piece as well, where you can then layer the signals on top, just like the ROI is way higher, right? Because now you can convert so much faster, you know? And yeah, depending on the time you're watching this, the ABM course may or may not be open. So just check out adconversion.com/courses to check that out. So now that we talked about the prioritization around fit and signal, now let's go down the next level around the actual list and the personas. So walk me through personas at these accounts, because one thing somebody watching this might be thinking is like, how many personas is enough? Should I go after the VPs and the junior folk? Like, what are your thought processes?
Yeah, I can speak from my experience. I usually see companies either deciding like 2-3 personas. So it can be like marketing, sales, and I don't know, like let's say HR, just giving an example. So they split the campaigns by persona so they can be more personalized. So they have a personalized messaging. And there's also another approach that hints to what you were saying, that it's more, okay, let's target champions and target decision makers. And there isn't right or wrong, it's just a different approach. And then you can get creative with the messaging. The common limitation that I see when you start breaking it down across multiple personas is, of course, budget and creative bandwidth, because yes, if you're being more personalized, you actually need to maintain that. So it's usually harder. So it's often either 1 or 2 personas, and to what you mentioned earlier, you can scrape your CRM data and see which, from your closed won data, from your open pipeline deals, you can see what are the primary contacts and see which function that person falls under, and use it at a starting point. And if you're up for the other routes, decision makers and champions, then yeah, it's about getting creative with your messaging and knowing that the content that will resonate with a champion, the person that might be using your product, won't be the same for the decision maker. So it's again, no right or wrong. I've seen it work in both ways. The more common, for sure, from what I see, is by persona, but the other approach also works well in some cases.
Yeah, I agree. Echoing your point, in my experience, it's been for create stage. It makes a lot of sense to go after the executives and the junior folks, because you're really just trying to get into the account and start to build brand affinity and trust, and you want to cast a wider net. And then from there, in the acceleration stage, where now the deal is open, now multi-threading makes more sense, because you've already hooked them on, and most people don't have the budget to multi-thread on the top of the funnel in the
Yeah.
create stage. So typically you're like either going all VP or exec and then or champion or both. Like ideally you're doing both because especially today, a lot of the junior folks, these champions, are tasked with these decisions of like finding tools. So it's great to get in front of them as well. And then once you've opened the deal, now you've got these open opportunities. Now we can run acceleration campaigns targeting open opportunities. And now you can multi-thread, where now you're not only going after the VPs or the execs and the champions, but now you can open up a third category, which is like operations, which could be like finance, you know, HR if it's applicable, etc. And now you're showing them a different message, you know, and now you start to create this multi-threading. And ideally, once you've entered the acceleration phase, if you've built up enough brand affinity and trust and you've already opened up a dialogue with your sales team, well, then hopefully now you have somebody who can act as a champion on your behalf to get you into the account.
Yeah.
Right. So it all kind of comes together. But that's a quick note. And I think the trap here to highlight for everyone listening around personas and, you know, all this is go back to your budget, because I feel like we've stressed budget so much, but it really
Every episode.
it's the thing that, you know, it limits your options, right? So just make sure, you know, going back to like that math we shared around like how many campaigns you can support, but just make sure that if you are going to target more personas, one, you have the budget for it, because that's a big trap. And then you fall into budget dilution, which we talked about. The second thing is you have the content resources. If you're going to go through the effort of having different personas, then the idea is you're creating different experiences, which means different ads, different content, different everything, right? It's just whatever you're doing times two, right?
If you're doing it right, at least.
Yeah, and then imagine too, like you're actually adding like regional complexity too, where now you're not just doing it in North America, you're doing it in EMEA, you're doing it in APAC, right? Now you just whatever you're doing, scaling the complexity. So
And
it's like
is a whole other beast,
whole other
because now you
beast.
have localized content.
Yeah,
And if you're
like,
splitting it by persona,
it can be as simple or as like as
Yeah.
complicated as you want it to be, you know. But it all kind of builds on the foundations of what we're talking about. So if you don't have the budget and you don't have the resources, one thing I would say is it's okay to go after multiple personas, especially in the beginning if you just want to get some wins and like you don't have the resources. And it's okay as long as everyone shares the same problem. So for context, like the VP and the junior person and the person in finance, they might all have the same core problem. And if you can speak to the problem and the problem relates to multiple decision makers, then that works as well, right? Because you're still resonating with them because they all share that burden of trying to solve that thing. Mm-hmm. So that's an easy tip there for everyone of like, how do I get started in the most resource effective way or light needs on terms of resourcing?
Yeah, the problem that happens often is you don't really know that core problem when you're launching those ads. And now, depending on the personas you're combining, the functions in this case, what happens is the function that least identifies with that problem is the one hitting most of the impressions just because of audience size, you know?
Yeah.
And that's the problem, because now you're getting a lot of exposure with specific accounts. Awesome. But then the people getting exposed to your ads don't engage it. Or even if they engage, it's like, okay, yeah, nice ad, but they won't do much because they don't really, that pain is not really pressing for them, that problem. And from me specifically, what I usually recommend is that, okay, if you don't have the budget, you don't have the bandwidth, the creative bandwidth or content bandwidth to work with multiple personas, it's like, okay, let's prioritize one. Let's start there, starting point, get some early wins. And then you can make the case, guys, okay, let's expand to another persona. So again, it's still scaling, but it's still, you're scaling still in your list of target accounts. You're not trying to do anything different. It's like, okay, we've been targeting marketing. Let's now do sales. And it's a whole different beast, different budget.
Yeah.
Different, like,
React differently to different creative formats, everything.
Yeah, they will react differently. Again, we were speaking in an earlier episode that marketers are savvy. Their bubble, these guys are used to seeing cool ads. Maybe sales isn't, you know? So you have to factor everything together.
Like for sales, it's just like the most outlandish content, you know? Like they see like, you know, you just have to, I think with sales, you have to get really creative too, to like stand out, a lot of humor, things like that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about ads. Now that we're like segueing into it, what are some mistakes people make around the ads specifically for ABM that come to your mind?
Top of mind? I don't see really isolated problems that are specific to ABM. I think the problems we covered in another episode around the messaging, the creative concepts kind of play a role
It's
here.
the same thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing here as well. I guess here people try to get creative and try to, again, maybe we'll get to that point, but like they try to have it be super personalized, where they do one-to-one campaigns, which is pretty much running ads targeting a specific company. And all they do is, and it works to a degree, but they pick one template, they change the logo, use it for another, then they repeat. And it can work. But when we talk about personalization, to me, just doing that alone, even though it can get you some results, it's the equivalent as like you're sending this personalized email where you're just changing first name, last name, company name, you know. Like, I wouldn't call that a mistake or a trap, because I mean it works. And I remember, like, from your conversation with Isaac, you mentioned that in some cases that's what they do. I mean, it's impossible if you're doing one-to-one to 100 companies, you have specific ads for each.
Yeah.
Maybe you do it when it comes to the prioritization. You try it for your top 10 campaigns when you're getting all those strong signals and you're really wanting to close. But in terms of isolated traps, there aren't specifically ones that come to mind with ABM.
I think I think you touched on one. Like, over personalization can be a problem with ABM, especially early on, where you don't have any wins or any, like, people over orchestrate ABM sometimes as well, where now what they're doing is they're spinning out, like, in the most extreme example, it's like you're doing a one ad for one company and that landing page is dedicated to that company. It's like amazing, you know, if you could do it at scale. But oftentimes people over resource, you know, they over plan, they get stuck in that period for too long. They under index fundamentally on, like, are we reaching the right people? Do we have the right leading and lagging KPIs to measure success? More importantly, is sales on the same page? They over index on that, and then they over index on this page and the over personalization, and to the detriment of the foundations, right? So all in all, personalized one-to-one ads are very powerful, and, like, if you can do them, they work phenomenally well, like one-to-one ads, in terms of click-through rates and the cost per click, etc. But just know, like, operationally, it's going to scale complexity. So if you have really good prioritization down, I love the tip you mentioned, like, you have your top 10 accounts listed out, amazing. Like, go all in, you know, even like if it's going to be 10 accounts, like, I would go even beyond just digital and, like, do direct mail and, you know, like, really try to get on these people's forefront. But fundamentally, the ads themselves, I think, to fall in the perfect world, it's like you're not just mixing the personalization of, like, who the company is and or the characteristics they bring, but also that data science piece. Like the Loom example I shared, where you're like, hey, 8 other users are at your company, right? If there's some sort of data point that you have that no one else does, and you can bring that to the forefront, that's extremely powerful to create messaging that will resonate, right? Because ultimately, when you're multi-threading and you're running these ads to these accounts, especially if you go with the one-to-one perspective, which if you can do it, I would totally do it, because you're going to drive a higher, you know, click-through rate, higher engagement rate than anything else. But when you're doing this, really what you're going after is you're going after the experience where somebody in the company sees it, and then they're like, oh my God, did you see that ad? And then they take a screenshot, and then they drop it in their Slack channel or their Teams channel, right? And then they tag the person who needs to see it. That's really how this happens in practice, right? Or somebody books a sales call, and then they say, oh, I keep seeing your ads everywhere. You know, this is like how you start to see these things manifest in terms of, like, actual impact with the creative. And let's close out here on this last point, which is sales outreach, and making sure that sales is outreaching to these leads in the most effective way. What are, like, some traps you've seen around, like, lead nurture, around, you know, following up leads with ABM?
Yeah, like, the biggest trap is not doing it. It seems basic.
It's so
but
true.
In some cases they just don't. The other trap is, like, assuming just because, depending on what type of lead it is, they ask for some content, a white paper. Oh, I'm trying to reach them out and trying to get them on the phone with us, and they're not responding. Oh, this campaign sucks. I mean, the campaign might suck, but these folks are not meant to speak with you right away anyway. And that's the second trap. And then the third is, like, yes, you have a follow-up where, oh, thanks for downloading this content, you know? So you send the first email, which is fine, but then you don't continue, or is not as often as, like the recurrence is not as often as it should. Or, and like this kind of is another, or even if you're doing that recurrence, you're not adding value. So when we talk about in a previous episode around like putting multiple content themes in front of your retargeting audience, that's pretty much the same thought process, right? You don't just want to pitch slap them with, oh, are you ready to speak with us?
Thanks for downloading our ebook. Would you like to jump on a 30-minute call?
Yeah, a free demo. Here's my camera.
Yeah.
I buy you lunch, something like that.
And I think the challenge too right now, especially with the rise of like, you know, tools like Clay and so on and so forth, is like people now are just like at scale sending generically personalized emails. And now with AI, it's like even worse, you know, like the content, the quality. It's like, hi, Gonzalo, I saw that you went to the University of Lisbon, you know? Yeah. It's like completely left field. Would you like to buy Salesforce? It's like, whoa, wait a second. You know, like, how does that even connect, you know? And this is where I think if you like data is a huge competitive advantage in ABM. So like if you can have data that you can use to reinforce your messaging and your ad copy is very powerful. Where now imagine like going on this example that I've been using with Loom, it's like now when they outreach, they use that data point to their advantage, right? Or it could be something else, you know, but if there's a way to bring that to the forefront, that is extremely powerful. So,
and also too, just to add to that, like one point that you mentioned when we were speaking about this with clients is around, okay, you're not only having that recurrence, but you're also setting that expectation or framing that expectation on your prospect's mind. I recently signed up for a landing page tool, and once I created a landing page, I enrolled in an outbound sequence where this guy is like, oh, you're using this tool, here's email 1 out of 17.
Oh, this is a good one.
2 out of 17. So I haven't opened any, you know, but I know that if I need content, it's there. And I haven't opened it, and I can check it out afterwards and see, but my perception is that nurture sequence is value. And I'm not a paid customer yet. I signed up for the free trial, so maybe that's where the 17 days comes in. The trial is 14. But in my mind, I'm already expecting them to communicate with me 17 straight days.
That's a very, like creating open loops in your outreach is extremely powerful for ABM. So basically an open loop is like what you're saying. It's like, hey, this is email 1 of 17.
Yeah.
So I've created an open loop where now I'm expecting 16 more emails.
Yeah, even if I don't open, I know it's there.
Yeah.
And the perception that I have is it's not annoying because, again, I haven't opened it yet, but I feel like it's personalized, even if it's not. So the perception is extremely different than, oh, I see you're on our free trial. Here's what you get if you upgrade, you know? I'm not ready for that yet. I will actually upgrade, but that's not because of the email.
Don't let their SDR see you, they'll hunt you down.
But you know what I mean? Like the perception is much different than, oh, these guys are always trying to sell. This is annoying. So there's why there's a lot of correlation between like email nurture sequences and the retargeting we spoke in a previous episode.
Yep. Guys, thank you so much for being here in episode 6. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching this episode. If today's combo hit home for you and you want to go deeper, check out AdConversion.com. You'll find free courses, a killer advertising community, and if you're ready to scale, we'd love to work with you.